Today we're looking at a concept that requires a very deep understanding of the game, and we have an example of a hand that shows how much a hand, even though it's the same hand across multiple streets, can be very different. So it can be a bad hand, it can be a great hand at the same time, and it can be used for various purposes at the same time as well. But let's just dive in. We have ace deuce suited here in the big blind. Asian flushy is our hero here, and we face a button open. We flop bottom pair with a backdoor flush draw. Also backdoor straight draws are in there, so quite a good hand, especially when playing against a button whose range is going to be very wide. We face a medium c-bet, which is not too uncommon here. And we have pretty much an easy decision. The only decision is probably do we want to call, or do we want to implement some check raises as well, which might be an option, but calling is likely the standard option, which is going to be happening the most often. Then on the turn, we see a card that opens up a lot of possibilities for imposition probably. So we are not going to be donking here at all probably. However, imposition will likely develop quite some draws here with a lot of overcards that they have in their range. And so we can anticipate a big bet here. So rigged egg goes for a pot size bet in this case, but in reality, and probably for the solver as well, an overbet is what I would assume is going to be the more often used option, just because you have so many hands that are good at this point. So the button has all the over pairs, jacks and better, which are happy to get much money in right now before the board turns out to be very very wet, or let's say brings in a lot of draws and shifts equity a lot. So let's say the river is an 8 of spades or any spade or any draw or any straight draw completing river, then an overpair is going to lose a lot of value or a lot of worth that they have. I'm not saying you cannot value bet anymore, but you definitely have a much higher equity advantage on the turn than on a lot of rivers. So you are happy to get as much money in here. And at the same time, you also have quite a lot of hands that are not so good. So low equity hands. And with those, you can leverage your the fact that you have so many good hands in your range by betting big as well and having more fold equity with your bad hands. So still, pot size bet probably perfectly fine. With bottom pair here, we have a decision to make. So as said, we are going to be up against many better hands here, but we are also going to face a lot of bluffs here, as said, just because imposition has a wide range in the first place and is incentivized to bet a lot of draws here for a big size as well. So we might just decide we are good here still with a bottom pair and just call. You could potentially also fold, just because a lot of turn cards are also not going to be easy to play for you. And if you're behind, then you also are in very bad shape probably. And you might not know what's happening on the river. You can get bluffed on the river. You can also just lose against a better hand, of course, and maybe get drawn out by a hand that is a bluff on the turn but makes a pair on the river, for example. But there's also a third option, and that is to check raise here, which is quite a sexy play and is not something you see often from players who are not great players. And that's why this play is something we see here on high stakes, but in reality we do not witness it as often, at least I haven't. Maybe you have different experiences, then let me know, please. But this play works pretty well, or is a cool play at first glance. I haven't checked the solver yet. We're going to do that in a second, for various reasons. So the first reason is we have bottom pair, and we're likely not going to be good 100% of the time, right? Not even close. And by turning our hand into a bluff, we can very likely achieve two things. One is just folding out better hands right away, which might not happen that often. So if in position barrels pocket jacks or better here, or even a top pair with a 10, then they will likely not fold more often than they will continue. However, that said, I believe that a hand like pocket jacks, pocket queens likely, and probably also a good amount of 10s will have to fold here in theory against the check raise, just because they are just a single pair. And the check raising range here from the big blind is not going to be too weak, right? So we're going to have a lot of two pair. We're going to have sets. We are at worst going to have a draw, which is quite a strong draw. So in theory, from my experience, those hands that are check raising here for a bluff are mostly combo draws. So hands like jack ace of spades, maybe even queen jack of spades, a hand like 5-6 of spades, maybe 4x of spades. So those hands are going to be in not too bad of a shape, so having quite a lot of equity. And if we're only sitting on a single pair here, then the best case we have here is that we are a slight favorite against those draws. And the worst case is that we're almost dead against a set or two pair. So it's not unlikely that a button has to fold 10x or better here, single pairs, and therefore check raising here as a bluff is probably not too bad of a choice. And the second reason is that we just, even if our opponent has a hand that is a bluff, for example, king jack off or king jack of hearts, for example, king queen of hearts, anything that is a gut shot with some overcards, then they have quite some equity against our exact hand here, but they cannot continue against the check raise. So even though we are not technically behind and folding out better hands, we are cleaning up a lot of equity. So folding out hands that have a lot of equity against our exact hand, and that would make it very hard for us to get to showdown against, right? So even if our opponent has a hand like 7-8 here, which could very well just barrel here with an open ender, we are ahead of that hand. But first they can make a straight on the river, they can hit a pair on the river, and even if they don't, they are not too likely to give up here. Same goes for a hand like 5-6, maybe even more, maybe even more so, just because those hands on the river are like 8 high, maybe 6 high, and are not too likely to just check it down and hand over the pot to you, right? So chances are you're gonna get bluffed on the river or just drawn out against. And if we can make those hands fold as well, then we have achieved a lot. So those two cases are very profitable for us, folding out these types of hands. And one additional benefit we have here is that we block pocket deuces, which is a very high equity value hand for imposition, of course. So if we want to do any bluffing here, two types of hands are very good for that, which are the combo draws that I just mentioned, but also hands that at least block your opponent's value range. So for that reason, this check raise is pretty cool. Not too sure if it's included in the solver's solution, but just the concept of it is quite understandable, I would say. We do get called here. So right now our hand is a pure bluff. Well, not exactly, right? So while we just talked about what kinds of hands we are folding out here, at the same time, there are going to be hands that are going to call us and are worse than ours. So Queen Jack, all Queen Jacks probably, all types of flush draws are probably not folding against the check raise here. And against those hands, we are actually ahead. So we're getting two things accomplished at the same time. We're getting better hands to fold, and we're also getting called by worse hands, which is quite cool. Then the river comes a 10, which is, I would say, a really good hand for us, just because those hands that we are ahead against now don't improve, right? So this hand doesn't improve any hand that was not ahead of us on the turn in the first place. And so any hand that called us on the turn that was behind is going to be behind right now. And now our hand goes from being a bluff to being a potential bluff catcher, right? Because our opponent is going to have hands that were ahead of us before, and they are still going to be ahead of us right now. So 10s plus, 9x probably not going to barrel for a big size on the turn. So it's basically 10s plus that will bet call on the turn and are now ahead of us. And the second category is going to be draws, or any kind of hands that we were ahead of on the turn and are now haven't improved. So we are still ahead of those. And if we have those two categories, their value hands and their bluffs, then there's no point in, well, there is some point of following through here, trying to get those hands that are ahead of us to fold as well. But we might as well just do it with weaker hands like 5-6 of spades ourselves, or other high cards that are not a pair, because having a pair here is quite a good bluff catcher, just because we beat all the hands that are bluffs in our opponent's range, as mentioned, and we still block a good part of their value range with pocket deuces. So here, button will likely not value jam pocket jacks, pocket queens, just because, well, maybe, but it becomes a little bit less likely when the run out brings in trips here. So our opponent's value range is reasonably tight, and if that is the case, then blocking their value range becomes even more important. So that's why in the end, eventually Asian Flushy decides to check call here and turns his hand from being a bluff on the turn, or pretty much a hybrid between bluffing and value raising, as we mentioned, to being a pure bluff catcher on the river. And before we see what Rigged Egg had here, let's quickly jump into the solver and see what the theoretical approach would be. So we are 100 big blinds deep, basically. Let's calculate it for NL 500, so we can apply it at lower stakes as well. And that's pretty much it. Button opens, and then big blind calls. Ace deuce suited is a pure call. Then we are going to simulate a half pot bet on the flop. Probably all kinds of sizes are going to be applicable on the flop if you adjust the ranges correctly. Then on the turn, let's see first what the solver's single best bet size would be, if it would use an overbet or a smaller bet size, and then adjust to the pot size bet if it's not the one that the solver uses here. And then we will also adjust the check raise, size. So 5.5 big blinds are in the pot, and then we are 106 big blinds deep with Rigged Egg. Create the solution. flop is 10 for deuce. And for a 50% pot size, we'll see 66% of bets. Most checked hand type is ace highs with a medium kicker. So those kickers higher than the 10 bet more often, and those that are lower do as well. And yeah, pretty much the same goes for king X. Also, we actually see quite a different distribution between bets and checks. For some combos, the hard combos actually bet more often than the backdoor flush draws, which is interesting. And here for the no made hands, so queen high and worse, we also see basically 70-30 mix of bets and checks. Slight preference for those hands that are straight draws, but anything else just mixes the same ratio basically. Overpairs always bet, sets always bet. Top pairs, the lower we go, the more often we check. Underpairs, the same, so those lower ones need more protection. That's why we bet them more often. 9x can check more often. And for second pairs, the higher ones bet more often because they are going to get called by worse hands, so worse 4x more often. And yeah, deuce x pretty much bets all the time. So against the bet, ace deuce is basically a pure call actually. And those combos, or the one combo without a backdoor flush draw is actually the one that sometimes check raises. And therefore we have a pretty easy decision on the flop. Quickly covering the check raising range. Top pair, the best, sometimes check raise. Two pair, always check raise. Sets also always check raise on the flop basically. So not too many sets in our turn check raising range, which is interesting. And then we have some backdoor ace high flush draws here that check raise. Gut shot with ace 5 off. Here, these backdoor straight draws with a backdoor flush draw do also check raise. Some king jack blocking 10x probably. And then we have some wild mixes with backdoor straight draws with queen jack, queen 9. These just wrap around possible straight draws on the turn when the turn is a jack, 9, 8. So we want to have some of those in our range here to be completely balanced. A little bit harder to find these in practice or to see these being check raised in practice compared to a hand like 6-5 or 5-3, which are straight draws right away on the flop, right? Just logical that people will check raise those more often when they already have a draw on the flop. On the 9, we likely do not donk, right? And here exactly in positions, single most used or single bet size with the highest EV would be an overbet, probably geometric to get all in on the river with the same ratio. So 170% pot would be the most preferred size. Let's change this to 100%, which was the one the button actually used. Probably gonna go up in frequency here for the bets. Yep, a little bit more than 50%. Every overpair bets this size, or bets. Top pairs mostly do, the lower ones, so the ones lower than a 10 or a 9 check more often. Second pairs almost never bet. Third pairs start betting when it's 4x here, so the higher ones, they likely get called by worse quite often because the button just has to defend 4x here against the bet. And so ace 4 is a better bet than jack 4. And then ace highs, yeah, a lot of flush draws are betting here, and flush draw blockers with the offsuited regions having a spade. Same for King X. So having these flush draws is of course not the hardest part here when we look at hands like King 8, King 7, but then mixing in some random frequencies with these offsuited, or not offsuited, but those combos that don't have a flush draw, that is what is really hard to get right in practice. Either people just don't bet them because they have no clear equity, or they just overdo it because they think they can just overbet here and their whole range, for example, which might be effective in practice even. But getting these frequencies even remotely right is very hard in practice. So you want to look out for people who just always overbet their bluffs here, or those that never do. Here, these overcards with straight draws, so gut shots, quite natural to understand. But then again, King 8 off, for example, barrels always, while King 7 doesn't. Maybe blocking a few more straight draws in the big blinds range, who knows. And against the pot bet, let's start with ace deuce. It's actually never raised, but it's continued around half the time. So this check raise is quite experimental, not solver approved, but for the reasons we just went into, it doesn't have to be a bad play, right? So we see some check raises with a hand like Jack 4 of spades, that is, however. And so pretty much almost no or no pair check raises here. Ace 9, 5% of the time. I mean, well, top pairs. So the raises that we want to implement here that are bluffs basically all come from open-enders, gut shots with a flush draw, open-enders, gut shot with a flush draw, open-ender with a flush draw, open-enders. Yeah, so basically combo draws and open-ended straight draws are the only ones we want to be check raise bluffing here, and then always check raising sets, those 9x or in pocket 9s, and some 4s that we didn't check raise on the flop, and then yeah, a mix of two pair, top two pair only, that is. All right, so does that mean this is a bad play? Not necessarily, of course. Even though this isn't solver approved, it might have some exploitative reasons. We could go ahead and now adjust the barreling range here if imposition barrels a different range. If they call a different range, well, first of all, let me adjust the size. No, that's quite accurate. So it's 37 big blinds here in the simulation. Here it's basically 36, so the size is quite accurate. But let's have a look at what imposition should be calling here. Never calling any overpairs, so wasn't quite right on jacks and queens that sometimes fold. They always continue. And then two pair plus even raise sometimes. But we do see some pocket, some 10x folding here. Queen 10, Jack 10, those simply block the most amount of draws that the big blind has, just because we just saw Queen Jack is a big part of the check raise bluffing range. So we don't want to have these in our range as often. Of course, if we have a spade, then we can always call with the flush draw, but the offsuit ones basically fold every time. And then King 10, Ace 10 can continue a lot more often, as do those that have a lower kicker. Well, that's basically because they are all spades. Otherwise, they wouldn't bet in the first place. Right. So we could, of course, say we adjust this check raising range. 4x we see is going to be continued quite a lot. If that folds a little bit more often, then maybe deuce x can check raise more often. We might actually experiment with that in a second for just a minute. Just want to look at which other hands call. Flush draws, very natural. King high flush draws, also very natural. And then, yeah, all of these combo flush draws, open-ended straight draws always continue. This is not too unnatural. Also, overpairs always calling, top pairs mostly calling, I would say is not too unreasonable. Maybe in this hand class we'll see less raises, which will also make our check raise with ace deuce a little bit more profitable. So that is something that could be different in practice. And then maybe less continuous with third pair. I think those bluff raises with 9x are going to be a little bit more unlikely in practice. Not necessarily saying for these high stakes guys, but on mid stakes and below, I would definitely assume this will happen less often. So let's just quickly have a look at what happens if we remove those check raises. If we can then check raise ace deuce suited more often. Let's go. So hand classes, right. Second pair. So let's say they still check raise sometimes, 20% of the time, and then call 80. Right now it's more raises and less calls, but still no folds. All right, so we adjusted that. Everything else we're just gonna leave the same. Just have a look at what happens if they raise us less often against the check raise. Did anything change? Yeah, just slightly. So we don't check raise more often even. It's a very, very small adjustment we make overall. We actually fold more often, call less often. That is a little bit strange. Right, so maybe that doesn't have a big impact. Let's then, that is wrong. Let's then see if them folding maybe third pair a little bit more often has a bigger impact. So I'm not sure what the overall folding frequency with third pair is. Can we just look at it without without changing it right away? Add filter. No. Oh, low pair. I wanted to look at this. So this looks like, oh yeah, 13%, 9% fold. So let's just make this 50-50. So 50% of the time they fold their third pairs. So a little bit more often than before in GTO. And see if that makes us want to check raise more often with bottom pair. Not really. Well, it does. Some deuce X now check raise, but it's only the jack deuce ones. Ace deuce. Well, we have 0.7% check raises here, all right? So we're getting closer. Still, this is apparently still far away from being the theoretical play or the exploitative play according to the solver. But again, we can adjust so many things in the barreling range in the first place. If that barreling range is more bluff heavy, then it would incentivize us to check raise more often, probably, maybe, definitely check call more often, maybe also check raise more often. And then also there are so many other details in the bet calling range here that we could configure. And of course, the big blind's behavior on the river also plays a role. So let's quickly look into that. Once we, ace deuce is in here now. This is still the node locked version, but let's work with that. Otherwise, ace deuce wouldn't be even found here. It would always check then on the river, and in position would jam 50% of the time. So trips basically always jamming, and full houses, of course, always jamming. Overpairs even still jam quite a lot of the time. So jacks 50-50, 1/3 of the time basically. Queens mostly, kings sometimes, aces never, probably blocking calling range. And then, pretty much those air hands would always bluff except for queen jack suited, almost never. Queen jack off, 1/3 of the time only. So if that was skewed a little bit, so in position would always barrel all of these or bluff all of these, and then maybe value bet a little bit less often here, then it would probably also change the behavior on the turn. Of course, this is just one run out, so I could node lock their behavior here on the river, but it would have a very small impact on the turn. We would have to node lock every single river here in order to see a big change on turn play. But just thinking, just reasonable thinking, can explain that if our opponent bluffs more often than they should on the river, then we can also use hands like ace deuce more often on the turn to check raise them. And against the jam, ace deuce would actually be a call in GTO here, given the small adjustments that we made on the turn already, modifying in position's calling range against the check raise. So here, basically every second pair and better would always call. Low pairs, ace 4 would be a call, ace deuce would be a call. So these aces make for better bluff catches, even ace high, sometimes calling here. King 5. Imagine you are the button and you bluff here with, I don't know, 7-8, and your opponent just check calls down king 5 of spades here. I mean, what does your face look like then? Well, that is theory, right? All right. I mean, this looks GTO approved except for the turn raise, right? But again, and for that, let's quickly look at the result. Rig deck did actually bluff here. So Asian Fluff, she did scoop the pot with this unorthodox or this exotic play, basically. And as we just saw, Queen Jack, especially Queen Jack of Hearts, wouldn't bluff here. So you might make the case that the button isn't too unlikely to overbluff here, because if you bluff Queen Jack, you are almost definitely bluffing Queen 8, Jack 8, 7-8. So all of these hands that are worse, that have less showdown value than Queen Jack. And if you have 100% of bluffs right here with your no-mate hands, then you are almost certainly over bluffing. And if that is the case, then obviously you can call ace deuce on the river if you get there, which was already approved in GTO. But again, it might make it a little bit more profitable to check raises on the turn. Right, so what do you think about this? Have you seen anybody check raise hands like this on a turn on your stakes? Would be very interested in hearing about that. I really only see these plays by high stakes players and when I look into hands like this. So maybe you can implement it into your game and make a little bit more money against very aggressive bluffers or just players who overfold against the turn check raise. That's it for today. I'm happy you watched the whole thing, and I'll see you in the next video.